Welcome, everyone. Today's webinar is how a blind person uses a website. My name is Bethany Servin, and I work in marketing here at UsableNet. And our first speaker today is Jason Taylor. He's our Chief Innovation Officer here. So I'm going to go ahead and hand you off to Jason now, and he'll get us started.
Thank you, Bethany. I'd like to start by introducing our guest speaker today, which is Joseph De Niro, who has a number of hats, but one of them is with Helen Keller Services for the Blind. I wanted maybe, Joe, you could just give us a brief background on what you do at Helen Keller Services. That would help just sort of set the scene in terms of your role at Helen Keller.
Thank you, Jason. So my name is Joseph De Niro. I am the Assistant Program Director of Assistive Technology Services at Helen Keller Services for the Blind. Helen Keller Services provides a multitude of services to both low vision users and blind users, from children all the way to adults, that helps them to achieve either higher educational or vocational goals. My role in the assistive technology department is that our department provides training to our clients in how to use assistive technologies with either computers or mobile devices to help them to acquire the skills that they will need in the pursuit of either vocational or educational goals.
Great, Joe. And if you're comfortable with it, could you maybe give us an idea of your journey towards being a full-time screen reader user?
So in 1994, I was working in the hotel industry. I'd been working in the hotel industry for nearly 10 years. And I was looking to get laser surgery. So I had I was not aware of, other than just wearing glasses, that I had any sort of visual issues. And during the process of evaluating me for the surgery, it was discovered that I had this eye condition called retinitis pigmentosa, which is a degenerative eye condition, and which inevitably leads to blindness. So that didn't really have an effect on me till about 2002. I started to use a white cane so that I could get around at night. In 2005, when I went back to school for computer science, I had to start to use Zoom text magnification software. And probably about 2014 or so, I migrated over to JAWS, and I've been a screen reader user since about 2014.
Thank you. And then finally, I know you found time. I'm not quite sure how we found time to help us at UsableNet put together a team for testing of client sites. So could you just give us a brief idea of that team and what they do?
So yes, yeah, I don't know sometimes how I find that time as well, but so I am the team lead for our digital accessibility team here at UsableNet as well, and we provide user testing for our clients in either on the desktop or mobile platforms, on web, on mobile apps, and to the accessibility, and speak to the accessibility and usability of the different digital platforms for our clients. And our clients run the gamut from e-commerce to educational institutions, airlines, pretty much any sort of company that has a digital presence, we provide services to.
Thanks, Joe. Bethany, you can go on to the next slide. Just to that point, so on the agenda today, what we really want to do is, and Joe's going to do most of the driving on this, is basically give you a demonstration and talk to you about how Joe and other screen reader users essentially use websites, and try to tie that back into what you should be doing and what teams should be doing and focused on with regard to coding that website, so it becomes easy for Joe to use his screen reader to essentially navigate and use that website. One of the things I'll just emphasize that at UsableNet, essentially pretty much every client that we work with, whether we're developing and building accessible content or websites for companies, or we're guiding companies' development teams to do that, there is always a component of Joe's sort of team of user testers, whether that's to verify the work that we've been doing for clients, or to verify the work that development teams are doing at the client side. So we find that the most important feedback is that Joe's team of a variety of assistive technology users can use a website. That's primarily the ultimate goal of any sort of accessibility effort, is to essentially make sure that the people that you're trying to make sure you're accommodating can use a website, and that feedback we find not just as probably the most important sort of data point, but also the most compelling. When Joe's team find barriers and we report those and communicate those barriers to clients, their teams become very motivated because they can see the practical barrier that's being put in place in front of someone who's trying to use their website or app. So I'm just going to start with a couple of simple slides just to sort of set the scene and make sure everyone knows why they're here, right? Why should we care about accessibility? If we can just cover that one slide, Bethany. And I think it's important to make sure that you've got these sort of key components set out when you're talking internally, when you're evangelizing that accessibility is important. We will typically highlight 4 core areas that we would talk about. One is it's good for business. Joe is part of a very loyal, big community. But once they start using a particular website or app, they typically stay with that website and app. So catering to that community is a good business decision. Secondly, from a technical point of view, if you follow accessibility as a guideline, you're going to make your website or app more usable for everybody. Joe's said this before to me: if a blind person can use it, anybody can use it, which is a good way of thinking about, wow, yeah, if Joe can use this website, then we must be making it more usable for everybody else. I think the third one is, for me, the most important. The digital world is an incredibly empowering place for everybody to work, to educate, to manage their finances. And we want to make sure that that is available to everybody in society. So that for me is probably the most important component. And then fourthly, there are lots and lots of legislation that indicate that it is a legal requirement. If you have a website and app and you provide services to people, you need to provide those services to all. And essentially that's where your accessibility comes in. And then before we start actually getting Joe to take us through how he uses the screen reader, I just want to tie the technical aspect of accessibility to what Joe's going to show us, right? And I think that's what's important is for people to understand, quote unquote, how does a screen reader work? And what I mean by that is, it's not a piece of magic. Joe is using exactly the same components as you would be if you don't use a screen reader, meaning he is using a computer and he is using a popular browser, whether it's Chrome or Windows or Explorer. And those are navigating the website. They are the technology that are rendering the code from the website to the browser. And then Joe has a piece of technology that then allows him to read and explore that structure. And we're going to talk a lot about structures and consistency. And this is really what Joe uses to sort of understand a website and then use a website is the structures that we put in place. But so when we think about screen readers, they are communicating to Joe what I would class as anchor points or structural elements that allow him to understand the structure of the website. So essentially, you'll see Joe, how do you use headers? How does he understand that there's a form on a page? And and how does he use his screen reader to know that quickly? How does he use a screen reader to almost scan a website's web page like we scan a web page with our eyes? He needs to scan it with structural elements that he's listening to. So these structural elements are very important, and we're going to talk about how his software allows him to expose some of those that we wouldn't typically know are there. So you're going to hear things like shortcut keys that he can use to say, hey, read me the headers on this page. That would be something that we would probably do with our eyes. We would scan for bold titles to understand what the headers are. And we'll talk about how technically, if they're not defined correctly for Joe, he's not getting the same cues and structures that we are. And really at the base level, everybody's probably heard of the WCAG, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Essentially, they are the technical specifications that say how to generate structure, consistency, and elements that then Joe can listen to and use to understand and navigate a website. So with no further ado, let's drum roll and get Joe to bring up his computer and then start talking through just generally how he starts to get around, firstly, his computer, so you can understand a screen reader helps him use his computer, and then whichever program he has open, whether that's Word or whether that's a web browser, how he uses a screen reader to then navigate essentially those applications. And in this case, it's going to be a web browser application using our website. Joe, if you could open up and share your screen. Bethany, do you know if Joe's? Oh,
controls.
Joe's
Share
back.
preview WND.
Okay.
Screen sharing meeting controls.
Okay, so the first thing that I want to do is, obviously we're demonstrating Google Chrome here. So I have an icon for Google on my desktop. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to use a keyboard shortcut to go to my desktop.
Windows D, folder view, list view, recycle bin, 1 of 119.
So you just heard it say recycle bin 1 of 119. So that's just indicating to me that the recycle bin is the first of 119 icons on my desktop, which tells me that I probably need to clean my desktop up at some point. So the next thing I need to do is to go to Google Chrome. So one of the tools that we have as a screen reader user is if you know where you're going to, you can hit the first letter of that program, and then it will take you to it. So if I hit G for Google Chrome.
G, Google Chrome, 4 of 119.
So it's the first instance of something that began with G, and I'm just going to hit enter on that and open up the browser.
Enter. New tab dash Google Chrome, toolbar, address and search bar edit. Type in text, Control+L.
Okay, so it's telling me that I'm in the address and search bar. So I already have copied to my clipboard the site that we're going to go to. So I'm going to paste that in.
Pasted. https://www.twitter.com. Enter. Homepage vertical bar right rta.com dash Google Chrome. Homepage vertical bar right rta.com. 8 regions, 10 headings and 46 links. Homepage vertical bar right rta.com. And
okay.
Homepage vertical.
So I'm going to start off at the top of the screen. So the first couple of ways that screen readers are able to navigate in general across most applications is basic arrowing and tabbing. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to arrow through the content here, just using the arrow keys. And this is something that all keyboard users have the ability to do. So I'm just going to arrow here from the top.
Same page link, skip to main content.
So there's a skip to main content link here.
Navigation region. Visited link graphic Greater Cleveland Regional Transit Authority. Main navigation region. Toggle navigation button collapsed. Main navigation search button collapsed. Navigation main region. Article. Home page vertical bar right RT. Same page link, skip to main content. Navigation region.
I just want to see one quick thing.
Alt space. Task name with bookmark. Reopen new tab. Maximize. Enter. Leaving menu.
I wasn't getting all the content on the page.
Home page vertical bar right RTA.
Okay. So now I'm going to start from the top of the screen.
Same page link, skip to main content. Link image.
So it's saying link image.
Link graphic paratransit services. Link paratransit service. Link image. Link graphic fares. Link fares.
So we're going to circle back to this because you're hearing this link information twice, but I want to continue down through this.
Link image. Link graphic community connection line. Link community connection line. Link image. Link graphic employee login. Link employee login. Navigation region.
So I'm going to stop here, and then I'm going to go back up to the top of the page.
Home page vertical bar right RTA.com.
So arrow navigation basically reads line by line at all of the content on the page. So now if I go and use tab navigation, that's going to take me everything that's in the tab order. So I'm going to tab now.
Home page vertical bar right RTA.com. Same page link, skip to main content. Site header banner region. Image paratransit services link. Paratransit service link. Image fares link. Fares link. Image community connection line link. Community connection line link.
So again, we're hearing those links. Well, there's an image with that information, and then we're hearing the same information in a link. But we're going to continue down.
Image employee login link. Navigation region. Greater Cleveland Regional Transit Authority. Greater Cleveland Regional Transit Authority link graphic. Main navigation region. List with 5 items. Schedules and maps collapsed link.
Okay, so it told me that in a navigation region, there's a list of 5 items.
Writing RTA collapsed link.
These are collapsible elements. So if I was to hit the space bar on any of these or enter on these,
space expanded.
It expands and opens up a submenu.
List of 8 items, nesting level 2. Link how to ride. Link fares. Link purchase fares online. Link bike information.
Okay, so I'm going to go back up.
Link fares. Link how to ride. List of 8 items, nesting level 2. Link expanded writing RTA.
If I hit spacebar again, it'll collapse this element.
Space collapsed. Link collapsed about RTA.
So these are a couple of ways. These are some of the basic ways that all keyboard users can use, but screen readers most certainly use to navigate around a website.
And Joe, can I just stop you 1 second? I just want to bring a couple of points there for people who are actually following this on screen. I think it's quite useful and to see that you're seeing where Joe's focus is, right? And we'll go back to a couple of what we'll class as sort of annoying things, I would say, not necessarily. And we can talk about this, Joe, about the inaccessibility, of like double links and stuff. But I think in general, what you're seeing on this site is that this site is pretty much well organized, right? What Joe likes is consistency, right? So he likes hearing that navigation is collapsed, for example, right? Because that means he doesn't have to listen to all of the sub menus before he gets to the next, next major heading. So collapsible menus which are collapsed, and then you have to action them. So either you have to hit return, right, or select them, right. Gives Joe a very similar experience. He uses return. Most people would probably use a mouse, or they're using a trackpad and they double click on that particular expand, right. So Joe's use of return is most people's use of double click. Okay. And if Joe wants to go back the other way, he just actually hit the shift and then tab back the other way. Tab is actually set technically, so you could decide that the order that you want is different than visually. It would be surprising in this particular instance, because essentially most people have designed a navigation to flow in a certain way visually, and it wouldn't, and probably that makes sense to keep that tab order. But that's one thing that's technically you can change. You can actually change the tab order, so Joe could actually maybe would navigate in a different order, because maybe you decide that certain links are put there, but they're not as important, and you want Joe to know about other links first. But that's how you would technically change what Joe would get on tab order. And the last point that Joe also made is, here's a great way for you to see whether your website is basically accessible, is get rid of your mouse and your trackpad and only use a keyboard with either tab, return, shift, and shift. And essentially that will give you an idea of what Joe's basic sort of ability to move around is. But there are lots of other assistive devices that only use keyboard and won't have some of the additional items that Joe's going to have on screen readers. So, for example, someone who has severe mobility issues might be using a device, again, that only really mimics a use of tab, a use of return, and a use of shift tab, which means go back the other way. So that's a good way for you to feel, if I can get around the website using tab and return, even if it takes quite a bit of time, because you've got to get through lots of links, you can tell yourself that you've got a reasonably accessible website. If you can't, you pretty much know that Joe's going to get stuck, and anybody who uses just a keyboard is going to get stuck. Joe, can you now introduce the concept of, hey, I've got a screen reader which is a little bit more intelligent, and it can ask the website other things about the code?
Okay. So the extra tools that I have available to me is that I pretty much can navigate to any element that's on this page, whether it's a button, an edit field, a radio button, and we're going to talk about headings in a second. And the purpose of why these were designed is that a visual user, when they navigate to a website, they just quickly scan the site for the link that they want, or whatever content that they're looking for, and then they're able to read it. So they're called quick keys. This quick key navigation allows a screen reader user to sort of replicate that in some capacity. So one of the main ways that screen readers users typically will navigate to get around a page, especially initially when it's a new page that they've never been to before, to kind of assess what the basic structure of the site is to navigate by headings. So I'm going to demonstrate that now.
Homepage vertical bar.
So I navigated myself back up to the top of the page.
Greater Cleveland Regional Transit Authority visited heading level 1 link.
So I'm just navigating by all headings right now.
Announcements heading level 2. GCRTA awarded $130 million heading level 3 link. Check out the GCRTA 2022 annual report heading level 3 link. Hiring drivers and mechanics heading level 3 link. In the community heading level 2. 2023 Origin Destination Survey : starting August 21st, heading level 3 link.
So as I'm navigating through these, you're also hearing the different level headings that are there.
Transit Police Community Watch heading level 3 link. 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline heading level 3 link. We're hiring heading level 3 link.
Do you want to stay on this topic or go into?
Well, I just wanted to actually give people an idea that Joe doesn't have. So what he's hearing is what is being coded, right? So again, how code can help Joe, right? These headers, sometimes are the same as the visual clue. So we would scan this visually. We would see that the in the community, for example, seems to be a header, a section that then has a number of other things underneath, right? And Joe's listening to this and he's hearing that there's a header level 2, right? Which, because it's been coded, he's assuming that the person that runs his website is telling him in the community is sort of a higher level header than the a 2023 Origin Destination Survey, which is level 3. But Joe can actually just hear H1s and H2s. It doesn't have to hear all the other ones. And Joe, maybe you can show that.
Yep.
Which means that he can quickly go to the top 2 or 3 areas on the website, find the one he wants, and then go into the detail. Joe?
Yep.
Homepage.
So I'm typically, usually there's just one level 1 heading on the page. So I'm going to go to the level 2 headings now.
Greater Cleveland Regional Transit Authority heading level 1. Announcements heading level 2.
So I'm going to.
In the community heading level 2.
So in the community, in the community tells, I would anticipate that there's stuff related to that. If I down arrow from here, and that's typically what we do, we go to a heading and then we will down arrow to see more content.
August 18th, 2023. Heading level 3 link 2023 Origin Destination Survey : starting August 21st. Link surveyors will conduct the Origin Destination Survey on both bus and rail vehicles. Read the full blog, read full blog.
Okay, so I'm going to continue with the level 2 headings though.
Let's go together heading level 2. Connect with us heading level 2.
So it says connect with us.
Link graphic Facebook.
So that's all the social media stuff.
Link graphic Twitter. Link graphic YouTube.
And I'm going to continue with level 2 headings.
Footer column 1 heading level 2.
So this is going to be the footer content.
Footer column 2 heading level 2. Footer column 3 heading level 2. No more headings at level 2 and 7.
And then it tells me that there are no more headings at level 2.
Great, Joe. I mean,
Page vertical bar right up.
Here's a really good example, right? Where you might test a website technically, and it might come back to say, well, there's nothing wrong with the headers, but actually there's no headers defined. So Joe doesn't get this type of structure. So that's one example of where, if you're using like automatic testing tools, you might find that web pages pass fine because they pass fine and they've got no header issues, because actually there's no headers defined. But Joe really benefits from headers and deciding which are the headers that are going to give him the best sort of navigation of a website. And so you don't want too many headers. You want to sort of set the headers to really guide Joe through what's on that page, and essentially guide him to the most important parts of that page. If I owned this website and I listened to those H2s, you might question some of the ones at the bottom, because the ones talking about footers, underneath there was actually navigation. And I don't think it indicated to Joe that they were actually navigation footer stacks, essentially helping him sort of get around in the footer. But that's how you can visually. I mean, a good thing, Joe, just to maybe show that is also forms. So, for example, like one of the things that you might do visually is you go to a website and you're like, well, where's the search area, right? Well, Joe might just like look for
Tick boxes.
forms, for example, and
Homepage.
find the search area quickest by using by looking to see what form inputs there are,
Search button collapsed.
as an example. So search might be, you know, eighth tab, but if Joe's looking for search, he's going to go to a home page and he's probably going to say, well, tell me what form inputs there are on this home page. That's probably going to give me the search quicker than if I try and use tab. Is that correct, Joe?
Yep. And yeah.
Yeah. The same goes for, you know, once you get to an area, you know, maybe we go there, Joe, where we go to like a fair or a trip, right? Joe's going to expect there's going to be some type of form to indicate like to and from. So he probably won't use headers. He'll probably try and find the form because that's what he's expecting on that page.
You want me to try to find the fairs page?
Yeah, I think we're writing schedules and maps. I think schedules
Same
and maps.
page link skip to main content.
Okay.
Link image, site header banner, link graphic link paratransit, home page same page link image, link graphic link image, link graphic link fairs, link graphic fairs,
Fairs probably.
link graphic community connection link image link graphic link employee navigation visited link graphic Greater Cleveland Reach visited heading level 1 link Greater Cleveland Reach main navigation list of 5 link collapsed schedules and maps space schedules and maps collapsed list of 3 items nesting level 2 link rail link bus link rail
Okay.
link BRT link rail enter rail vertical bar right rta.com blank 9 regions 5 headings and 46 links visited link graphic Greater Cleveland Regional Transit Authority graphic Greater Cleveland Regional Transit Authority main rail vertical bar right rta.com rail heading level 1
So I'm gonna start from here.
rail tab bus tab rail tab enter main region tab rail tab selected escape bus tab BRT tab trolley tab all schedules tab select language combo box English
Okay. So
content info region level AA conformance W3 select language combo box English to change the selection use the arrow keys level AA conformance W3CY web content accessibility guidelines 2.1
so
link
right now
graphic explanation of
I navigated by forms, and each one of the tabs for the different parts of the transit system were set up as form elements. And then the very first form element I came to was the language.
search tabs content info region level AA conform select language
Joe,
combo box
So Joe, I'll just stop there for and people who are visually watching this, right? You can tell probably that this has not been tested with screen reader users, and probably not been tested just with you know, a keyboard navigation, because what Joe's sort of revealing is that it's reasonably hard for Joe to actually get to the next level. We're seeing that essentially there's content that is within those sort of tabs that you heard: the rail, the bus, the Brit, the trolley, and inside of those there's sort of like different rails that you can pick: the red line, the blue line, the green line. But Joe hasn't found that yet, right? This gives you an idea of how, when visually it looks like, oh, this is going to be simple, but structurally, and you just try and tab, Joe doesn't get to that stuff. And this is where tab order is fundamentally really, really important and cannot be tested automatically. You have to have someone go in and actually decide that if the tab order was used and Joe was listening to the tab order, when would he access Redline and how would he get there? So these are sort of the revealing natures of what I like about it is that Joe has to use a keyboard, but that's easy to test. Everybody can use a keyboard. But most people don't actually do testing with keyboard. They might do testing with Wave or automatic testing like that, and essentially miss the practicality of what the coding is. As I said to you before, automatic testing can only tell you what's there. Is it okay? But not is it usable? And Joe's revealing how sort of frustrating this would be for Joe to actually go and find what the fares are on rail using these methods that he has right now. So I want to actually, I want to leave a good amount of time for questions. We're about 40 minutes in. We've got 20 minutes left. I wanted to do 5 minutes, sort of just tying up some knots on this, and then leave 15 minutes for questions, if that's okay, Joe, because I know there's going to be a bunch of questions for you.
Okay, so I'm going to unshare.
Alt-S.
No.
Screen sharing meeting control. Alt-S.
So, I mean, I started talking about sort of some of this well-meaning mistakes, right? So, and actually, Bethany, if you can bring up sort of just, for example, the Wave report on that particular website, right? The homepage of that website is completely clean. So from a Wave perspective, which can only test what's in front of it, essentially it's saying, hey, all the elements that have been put on this page have been correctly coded and conform with W3C's technical specifications, right? So one of the things that you heard when Joe was navigating, right, is that there was actually, sort of like, I would say, like overkill on links. Somehow they decided that they would make the image linkable and the title linkable for the top navigation. So Joe here's link and then a destination, image link and then a destination, and then the actual title, which was, for example, fares and a link to fares. So there's actually two links. One just says image link, and if you don't look at it, Wave is going to think that that's okay, because Wave doesn't look at the actual coding and decide whether that's okay. And Wave isn't saying, hey, two links next to each other is incorrect. So, you can't just rely on automatic testing. Automatic testing will really tell you if you've put something there, is it coded correctly? It won't really tell you whether it's making it logically usable and good experience for Joe and other screen readers. And then finally, sort of to that point, and I wanted to get Joe's input, right? We've seen a lot. One of the things that Usenet does is we track a lot of these lawsuits, and one of the things that we do is we try to say, okay, when a company gets sued, are they doing something already? And that also means that we track to see whether they're using something like a widget, which is sort of a panel that comes up and helps users change the sort of experience of that website, potentially increase the font size, reduce the contrast colors, and try to fix some things automatically. And what we found is a lot of the lawsuits are against companies that have already invested in those. They're not suing the company because they invested in those. They're just listing that component as being an additional hardship for them, or creating an additional problem, as well as all the other problems that are on the website. And it's important only in this context, because we're talking about screen readers. Nearly all of those lawsuits are brought by blind people using screen readers. So I wanted Joe to explain to me why are screen reader users having problems with widgets more than, let's say, other groups of users? What's been your experience, Joe, and why do you see that being potentially the issue?
Well, I think first and foremost, the widget in of itself doesn't change really any of the underlying code that has an impact on, if a screen reader is having issues with a website, it's not really changing the code to address those issues as far as just the ability to interact with certain elements if they're having challenges with that. The other issue is sometimes some widgets want you to use their own built-in screen reader that they have, and the problem with that is you're already using a screen reader, so you have to disable your screen reader, turn yours off to enable that screen reader. And number one, there's a learning curve. You don't know how to use this product, so you're trying to figure out how to use this product, and in almost every case it's very limited in what it can do. You're basically stripped back to what I demonstrated initially in this presentation, which is just arrowing and tabbing around. You no longer have any of those keys to those other tools to kind of move you around quicker to get to certain structures of the website. So those are the biggest things that are challenges.
Good insight. Thanks, Joe. And I think we're sort of just at the end with enough time for a good Q&A. So we managed to keep it on track so far. So we're 45 minutes in. We've got 15 minutes of Q&A. I already see about 31 questions. We may not get to the end of them, but we will answer all of them. So Joe and I will answer any that get unanswered. So I do encourage you that if you feel, oh, it's too late, I've got a question, but they won't answer it, we will answer it. We may not answer it in the next 15 minutes, but if we don't get to it, we will get to it. And we will email you directly because we know from Zoom who the question came from. So Bethany, maybe you could quarterback the Q&A session for us, pick out some questions that you think are general interest.
Yeah, there's a question about the redundant links that were on the page, and just how frustrating are they? There's an additional insight. I try to keep them to a minimum, but it's really common to link multiple items in a location to the same place to ensure users can reach the link, even if they click the image or the title or the actual button. So how frustrating is that issue?
It's definitely a nuisance, but add a little bit of complexity. Have a screen reader user that may have a cognitive issue also in addition, and it could be a little confusing to hear that information repeated multiple times. So there could, you could create a confusing situation. For someone like myself, it's more of an annoyance than anything else.
Yeah. So well, there's maybe two things. What you heard was actually probably one is they were actually incorrectly labeled, right? Well, one out of the two is incorrectly labeled. So Joe actually doesn't really know what the image link goes to. He might think that that's actually something else, and it's not just the image of communities, which also has a link, right? So there was an image of there was like a dollar sign image for the fairs, right? That had a link and it said image link, right? And then there was fairs link, right? Well, Joe knows that fairs links goes to fairs. He doesn't know what image link goes. He doesn't know that there's an image sat on top of fairs visually, and they're going to the same place, right? So technically, how you would do it is actually create a region and add those two elements together, and only give them one link. So only So if you got three items which you're like, hey, they all go to the same place, technically you would make that a region, put the 3 elements in the region and make one link go to the region.
That's great, Jason. That's really good insight. Joe, what are your top accessibility pet peeves when navigating a site with a screen reader? What common things do you find to always or frequently be inaccessible?
I don't know if really there are common things as far as pet peeves go. Not having good heading structure. So I've gone to sites where there's no headings, or maybe one heading on the page, and there's a significant amount of content on the page. So again, one of the main tools that I have now to navigate the page is sort of taken away from me. The other challenges are just interaction issues where the elements on the screen are not interacting properly. Where I demonstrated before here, it was fine. Where we expanded those menus, and and then I just arrowed down through the submenu, very easy. There's been many times where we have a navigation menu, and I expand the menu and down arrow, and I just go to the next navigation. The next navigation menu, and and then I have to navigate back up and try to figure out what's going on, and then we'll switch to tab navigation, and that will access the menu, and then I can then down arrow through it. So there's like this extra step to get into the menu.
Okay, I have a related question here. Are there particular types of interactions like pop-ups, sliders, or forms that consistently pose problems? And then how can these be improved?
Pop-up sliders or form?
Yeah, like if you're on a website and it has a carousel, are you filled with a sense of dread because that consistently poses problems for you, or is it?
Oh yeah,
just
carousels are many times carousels are a challenge. You'll get to a carousel, and the images are not labeled to begin with, or if they're labeled, and you enter on, I'm hearing next slide in a carousel, and the slide advances, but the screen reader doesn't read anything to me, so I have to navigate back to that slide to figure out what the slide in the carousel is, as opposed when it's done really well, I can just hit like the next slide button, and it will read me the next tile in the carousel. So those are things, yes, I dread. As far as forms in of themselves, a lot of that is labeling. Is just like sometimes the labeling is not great. Sometimes I've seen forms where, for example, like some forms for a phone number, dashes, like hyphens are not, they don't want hyphens in, they just want digits only. So there's no instructions in the label to indicate just that just to input numbers, and you get all the way to the end, and this is combined with error reporting, and then you get to the end and there's an error, and they tell you that there's an error, but they don't tell you what the specific error is, and then you have to navigate literally through the entire form until you get to the form field that says invalid entry, and then you have to figure out because you have no feedback, you have to figure out that you shouldn't have had the hyphens in the phone number. So labeling is really important for forms.
I would bring to that point, Bethany, like the items that we find, especially when we're involving Joe and his team, where we give a report to a client, like, this is where initially the users found a major barrier, but then we help them remove that barrier, and then maybe we do some additional testing, right? Is the first time people use websites, and there's a complicated, for example, cookie management pop-up, or other types of pop-ups, which essentially aren't keyboard navigable. So, a lot of people, a lot of companies even do a lot of work on their website, make super accessible, put it up live, but then another department can add in a cookie policy, which comes from a third party, which isn't accessible. And essentially, because that's the first thing that Joe's going to get a focus on, if he can't navigate it with his keyboard and dismiss it or accept it, then he's never going to get to the website. So that sort of indicates it's really important to do live testing and clear all the cookies from browsers before you do a proper test, because a lot of times you may have already accepted certain pop-ups which you forgot are there when you start doing your first test.
That's a great point, Jason. Someone had a question, Joe. They saw that you have both JAWS and NVDA, so two types of screen readers installed. Do you switch between them depending on the task? And do you have any advice for accounting for differences in behavior between screen readers, specifically in web development?
Read the first part about switching between, like.
Yeah, do you switch between them?
No,
depending on the task.
No, typically I'm primarily a JAWS screen reader user. But I use NVDA for my role here at UsableNet. Sometimes I will use NVDA if I'm having challenges with a website, and I will switch to NVDA because you sometimes get a different experience using the other screen reader. So I use it in those situations to try to get through a situation, but it is not my primary. It's more of a backup, or it's what I'm using for testing when I'm testing a site with multiple browsers and multiple screen readers.
It is an important consideration when you are sort of testing with screen readers, what you feel the major sort of combo will be in your user base, and it'll be different based on the type of site and the type of users you have, right? So again, we did talk about before, Joe's setup is I believe is Windows, Chrome, JAWS. Is that correct?
Yep, Windows, Chrome, JAWS. That's my primary.
And you'll find that is pretty much the primary for people who are in education, people who are in government, and people who are in large corporations, because those organizations get grants or get money to buy those combinations, right? JAWS is actually quite expensive as an individual use, right? If your website users are a lot more probably people who brought their own technology, you'll probably find that a lot of them probably might just use Apple and VoiceOver on Apple, because that's probably the cheapest combo out there. But again, it depends. So sort of trying to understand your general use base is important when you're testing with user. The other thing to think about is this, which is, imagine that Joe, you go get a user team of blind users, and they all use Windows, Explorer, and JAWS, and they seem to have a lot of problems on your website, right? It might be because you actually don't test with Explorer to start with, right? And the issues are in the Explorer, not in JAWS, not in the screen reader. So you don't really want to use a combination of screen reader users using a browser that you don't already test with, because then you're adding another component. So, if you do a lot of testing with Chrome, I would probably say you want to get a Chrome user with JAWS, or Chrome user with a screen reader. And make sure that person is using Chrome, because you've done enough testing with Chrome.
Yeah, I have some statistics on this from a WebAIM survey where they asked, what people use for their screen reader and what people use for their browser, the combination. So I can actually add that at the end of the deck so everyone has that resource. I think it's a really interesting point, Jason, that you made about understanding your users. Like Joe uses JAWS. Our intern, who's a recent grad, he uses Apple, because as you said, it's pretty affordable. Related to understanding users, I do have a segue. Would it be your advice not to use an accessibility overlay if many of our users, so they know that their users have visual impairments? We're in the process of building a site with a consultant who wants to implement a third-party overlay. As I'm learning, I don't think it's a good idea. So the question is, would it be your advice not to use an accessibility widget or overlay if they know that their users have visual impairments?
Well, my input is that technically, I don't think that's going to be a great technical solution for users. Joe can give his input, but I also, based on the numbers that we're seeing from a legal perspective, right, and we track, it definitely doesn't protect you from lawsuits, because the screen reader users that are bringing lawsuits are referencing that they have problems with those types of widgets and overlays. Joe?
Well, as I said earlier, there are challenges. So if I knew that, a lot of, or there's going to be some sort of significant number of users that are screen reader users, I would not choose to use it, because it at the end of the day, it doesn't solve any of the challenges that are already in place on the website.
And that will conclude our session.